All right, back to you, President Chin. We're all set.
So welcome back, and I am going to turn the meeting over to Kylan.
Thank you very much. It'll be just one moment, grab something for Rachel.
President Chin, can you read that statement though? So about the motioning after the special public comment? Thank you.
Pages are
14. Right after the word Klein, after Rose's bullet.
Okay. The board will now discuss the agenda items related to the executive director recruitment. We will then accept public comment on the standards, criteria, and policy directives for the recruitment. The board will then vote individually on each recruitment item, and then we will begin with the executive director recruitment plan with Kylan. That's what I meant by take it away, Kylan.
Very much. So Rachel, I just sent you the PD that was shared with me before the last recruitment for 2023.
Thank you.
So I apologize if that was not shared ahead of.
That's okay. And that's kind of down,
Okay.
it's down the agenda. So we'll start with your other mailings and I'll pull up the first one. Give me just a moment.
Okay, and before we get started, I will say it's very challenging to be extremely linear with all of this work because each document kind of affects the other document. So we may have to do some bouncing around rather than just directly from one to the next to the next. The first one we have here, this recruitment plan document is the one that will be impacted most by all of the other decisions that are made today.
Okay, so now I'm sharing this with the public. This is mailing A. Here you go.
So this is essentially a draft and we'll go through and add some tentative dates and things as we discuss the process and make decisions on how each step will take place. So this will essentially prior to this meeting and things that will need to take place today and throughout the process. I'm going to pull it up on my screen here so that I can kind of keep track and let you know where we move. The beginning here, we've got a draft recruitment plan, which is this document. There's profile preparation that had been had. I met with Board President Shin to go over some potential aspects that we would be looking for in this recruitment that differentiate from the last time around. The update the current position description that will take place here today. We'll have a chance to look at the one I just sent to Rachel to make any edits, which would then impact the actual draft announcement that we'll discuss later. But Rachel, if you can scroll down to
Yes.
number 5 there. This is where we're actually at today, which is adopting this final plan. So we're going to be going over all of these documents that I just discussed and making some motions to approve any and all of these things. And these are just some examples that are listed just below that of motions that may take place, such as determining the requirements, minimum qualifications around a licensed pharmacist being required or preferred but not required, approving that position description, determining the total amount of advertising funds you would like to put forward and approving that as well, and potentially delegating any authority to one or more individuals throughout this process, and then a final motion to approve the full recruitment plan. But moving down from there, we're looking at the overall recruiting process. This is prior to interview and selection. Essentially what this indicates is our advertising strategy, how long we will announce the position, some places that we may actually post the announcement to outside of just the standard website for state jobs. And this that you see on the screen right now is a small section of that. We're not set in stone on any of these. We can choose to utilize them or not. That in a moment when we look at the actual advertising plan document. And then number 2 and number 3, the announcement posted. We typically do 30-day postings for executive director positions. You could all choose to do that longer if you feel that's necessary. We can also put in a caveat that if we don't reach a number of qualified candidates by the end of the 30 days, that we would extend for a week to 2 weeks. That's up to you all here today. And then the third bullet here is the application processing and screening. You all received some legal consults earlier today that explained some of the aspects around public meeting law that would be affected with application screening as well. So if there's more than one individual who are reviewing the application materials and scoring those, that would mean that your candidates would become public. Their identities would be shared, their scores, all that sort of fun stuff. So we'll discuss that a little bit more later today. But then from there, we actually move into the interview and selection process. This is what most people consider the recruitment process. So there's a lot of work prior to this that has to be done, but it's what most people are familiar with. And this just shows a first round of interviews being held through VidRecruiter, which we'll discuss in just a moment. And you can choose to opt to use that or not use VidRecruiter. And then a following interview after that has been narrowed down, and we'll determine whether that's going to be one individual interviewing a panel or the full board to do some semifinalists. And then we move to number 3 under interview and selection. The next phase here, this is where we get staff, interested parties, and the governor's office involved. So you would essentially have your finalists at this point. We usually narrow it down to about 3 candidates, or hopefully 3 candidates at this point, and they would have an opportunity to meet staff, any interested parties, and then have a short 20 to 30-minute interview with a governor's policy advisor or the governor herself prior to going into a final interview. With these meet and greets, we would ask that staff and any interested parties share questions they'd like asked of these final candidates ahead of time. This is how we did it in the past. Those questions get asked by me to the candidates, and the staff get to watch that. So that the interested parties, we typically do those separately. And then at the end of each of those sessions, there's a feedback form that would be shared where staff and interested parties get to provide their input on strengths and weaknesses of each candidate. And that would all be brought to the full board for the final interview. And so would the info that's received from the Gov's office. And that's when we move forward. And I'm realizing that you all have a slightly older version of this document where reference check should be number 4, because we would do reference checking prior to candidate selection, because the results of the reference checks would also be shared with all of you on that final day of interviews. So it would be reference checks, final interview, candidate selection. There's a little bit of a backwardness there, so I apologize for that. But on the final interview, it would be with the full board, typically in person, but we can do a hybrid setup similar to today's meeting if necessary, or if you all would prefer to do everything virtually, that's acceptable as well. But you would have an opportunity to meet an executive session with your final candidates one at a time. Then I would share all of the information received throughout this process, and you get to discuss strengths and weaknesses of your candidates in executive session, and then come out into open session to determine who you would like to authorize for hire. So that's the recruitment process in a nutshell, and we'll break down into each of these as we go through. Do we have any questions before we move forward?
Questions?
Right, making it easy on me. For now.
Yes. Yeah. Just wait, sir. You saw the wording.
Okay, you ready for the next
Yeah, let's
mailing?
go ahead
Okay,
and move to the next document.
which I think is A1, the recruitment plan options. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay.
Okay, so this document is just to supplement what we just went over. Kind of breaks out each section into a couple of different options that you all can look into and determine which path you'd like to move forward with. I put 2, sometimes 3 options here, but you're not limited to those choices. If you all feel that there's a better way that works for you as a board to make this work, we can look at that as well. But when it comes to application review, the typical way that we go about this, well, actually, before I start there, I will say the things to consider when choosing any of these options. There are a few of them. So we need to determine, are we wanting to expedite the process as much as possible? Are we wanting to reduce the total number of public meetings that we have to call, which can be cumbersome in timeline? Are we looking to control anonymity of candidates? Or are we wanting to have every member of the board participate in each step of the process? Because depending on what you value there will determine which of these options you select. So in the beginning process for application review, what's typical is that we will post the announcement. I will go through as candidates apply and make sure they've attached all the documentation we request, whether that's a resume, cover letter, etc. Honestly, I would say just resume, that's my preference. Verify that they meet the minimum qualifications, if any are established, and then we would move the candidates forward that meet those minimum qualifications to a single individual who has been granted authority by the board to review the desired attributes, which we will establish those desired attributes later today when we're looking at the position description and the job announcement. And if you do it that way, there's no public session necessary. We have another option where you can have myself do the review for minimum qualifications. And then you can have a subcommittee of individuals go through and review those desired attributes. So they would have to do their scoring individually, but they're going to come together either in an executive session or an open session, depending on how you go about it, to rank those candidates and then publicly announce which candidates would advance. So their anonymity would be cut off at that point. One thing to note is candidates who are not advancing forward would not become public. You wouldn't say, we're moving forward these top 10. Here are their names. Here's the names of everybody who didn't make it. You would just say, we're advancing the top 10. These are their names. That's how that goes there. The third option that I listed is just having myself go through the minimum qualifications and the requested attributes for you all. That would essentially just be delegating authority to myself to do all of that review. And then we would move forward to a first round of interviews. So any questions on that before we move to first round interview?
Hyland, just a clarifying question. For option number 3, how would candidates move forward? That would you present that to the board to decide which of those candidates move forward, or is option 3, as the executive recruiter, you're deciding which ones move forward to the first round interview?
The latter would be the way that would work.
And would it be an all or nothing, that they would have to meet all MQs and requested attributes, or?
Usually we would
what is-
determine a threshold.
Okay.
Member Patel, what does MQ stand for?
Minimum
Minimum
qualifications, my apologies. Any other questions, or should we move forward?
Board Member Patel, so let's say, I don't know if you're going to discuss later, but on the option 1, it says single appointed individual review for requested attributes. That's what we are going to decide later, that who is going to be that thing. Is it going to be board member, or is it going to be you or some third party?
So you would choose any one of these options. If you're choosing a single appointed individual, what I mean there is potentially your board president, your board vice president, one of your board members being the individual who would do that. Or if you're wanting just me, you would be voting for option 3 there. If you're wanting a combination of myself and multiple board members, or a board member and a staff member, or anything like that, that's option 2.
Board Member Kroger, are we voting now on each of these sections, or we're gonna come back?
We're gonna come back to all of this. We'll vote until we've gone through everything and had public comment, and then we'll vote.
Can have discussion further on each of the options for clarity prior to that vote as well.
There's lots of time to talk about these, so So it's just the beginning.
And again, the structure that I've provided here with this process is just to try to make things as efficient for you all as possible. And that's why you'll see recruiter's recommendation next to any of these steps. It makes it so that we don't run into any issues with public meeting law or veterans preference law or any of those types of things. Just trying to make things move fluidly for you all, but to also engage as many candidates as possible and find the right fit for your agency. We can go ahead and move down to the first interview options then.
Kylan, actually, I want to make sure that the board knows during the last recruitment process, option 2 is what was used, minus the public meeting portion, but there was involvement by multiple board members for the application review during the last recruitment. I just wanted to share that for context.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. That was the route that we took last time around, and that was one of those moments that we discussed where commitment is absolutely necessary if we're having multiple people, because we had some that wanted to just score a handful of candidates that they saw as they were skimming through, and they're like, these look good, here's their score, I'm not going to look at the others. That's unlawful hiring practices. We can't do that. It's just absolutely not possible. It's all or nothing. And if we have multiple people, then we are subject to that public meeting law. So we have to determine if the scoring is going to be done in public or an executive session. So we'll come back to that later, but thank you, Sherry. And then with the first round interview options, I mentioned VidCruiter. Is anyone here familiar or unfamiliar with VidCruiter? Does that ring a bell?
We did that last time.
Yes. I know some people were here last time and some not. Essentially what VidCruiter is a platform that we use to have candidates submit a virtual interview. It doesn't require any other members that are reviewing the interview to be present while the candidates are submitting that. So it makes it so that we can move things through quicker. The candidates would receive 3 to 5 questions. They would record themselves answering those questions, and then whoever's delegated to review that, whether it's one person, 2 people, the full board, would be able to go in at their leisure during a certain window of time to review each of those interviews and rank them. Again, just like the application review, if we have more people, it would be subject to public meeting. And like with the application review, if you score 1, you have to score all. If we don't score all of them, then it definitely makes an issue with veterans preference, and we don't want that at all. But again, it helps narrow down the pool overall. Recruitment is an interesting beast as we're trying to be as inclusive as possible and bring people in while also narrowing everything down to one singular person. So this kind of does both things. It gives an opportunity for candidates to not have to take away time from work to drive to an interview or set aside a meeting during their office hours when everyone's available. And the same goes for anybody who's reviewing those as well. And then we can take that shortened list and move forward to a second round of interviews. But the other option for a first round of interviews is to just do it as a subcommittee that meets in real time with your candidates, or have a designated individual. These are the things you're going to hear me say over and over again. A designated individual meet with those candidates as a first round of interviews.
Board Member Kirkbride, I have a question. I have heard of video interviews. I haven't facilitated one or participated in one. My understanding from the other documents you shared, there is a time lag where they receive the prompt and then they have a certain number of days to submit their video, versus option 2, where the candidate would just be receiving the prompt in the moment and not have time to contemplate their answer. That's kind of the difference also between those 2 options. Is one, the candidate has more time to sit with the question.
So yes and no. So you're correct that one, they're given a certain amount of time, like a time period to submit their interview. During the VidCruiter process, when they log into that platform, they're given some options to test their equipment to make sure that their camera and microphone are working. We can also record a welcome from either Board President Chin or the full board prior to them receiving the interview question prompts. They're then given 30 seconds to a minute, depending on what we set up, to read the interview question, and they're given 3 to 5 minutes to answer that question. They're given 2 attempts to do so in case there are any technical issues throughout that process, but it is very close to a live interview. It just removes the need to be as structured in the schedule of the interview. Any other questions around VidCruiter?
Just one, this is, board member Chin. Earlier you had said that VidCruiter or not VidCruiter. And so I just wanted, in case anybody else heard you say that, wanted to make sure that we understood what you meant by use it or don't use it. If we don't use it, then what happens?
If you don't use VidCruiter, you have the opportunity to either appoint a single individual to meet with your candidates for an interview, or to appoint a subcommittee or a number of individuals to meet with your candidates for an interview.
That would be trying to corral everybody. Yeah, so that's the bonus for VidCruiter then.
Correct. And again, it gives so much flexibility to your candidates. There are some who may be put off by the use of technology or having to film themselves in response to interview questions. But that's why, like I mentioned, we can do a welcome video that they would receive prior to the actual VidCruiter interview to sort of ease those anxieties going into the new interview process.
Member Patel, so, as far as I know, that what option we done like last 2 times? I think it was like every board member they received VidCruiter, right? And we all give the scoring, right? So
That is
which one
correct.
is that option? A, B, or?
So it is a combination of VidCruiter and B. This time I did not list a version like that. It is an option that you all can take, but it's not one that I would recommend as it becomes very time consuming. But it would essentially be your subcommittee type process where it would be subject to a public session. For you all to do that, you would be able to rank your scores in VidCruiter, but then we'd have to come into an executive session or open session to go through the process of selecting candidates.
To me, last 2 times, I would say, and this is, again, it's me, my opinion, there was no transparency in the last 2 times what we done the recruitment process. So to me, I was like, if it's going to take more time, so be it. And we want to choose the right candidate. And we want to be more transparency this time than last 2 times. Like last time, it was like 15 to 10 to 3. No, most of the board members, they didn't even know, how did you come up with 3, candidates? So if we can put that option, I do like the last time what we done, like with the first round of interview with the VidCruiter, that every board member has a chance to see the candidate and they can do scoring. I would prefer that option if that is available.
Yes, that is available. We can also reduce it to just the board members that would like to participate. That's close to the BB option, but just with VidCruiter. Again, that does require open session processes. And I do understand there were concerns around transparency last time around. And some of that was communication from myself to your former board chair or board president being dropped off and not shared. So there was a miscommunication and a communication gap there. And so we'll do everything that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen this time around.
I have a question about if you when you do one part for all, does it have to be one part or all through the whole process, or can you do one part and then all? I think that's,
Yes.
and we need to clarify that. Okay.
Thank you for asking that. You do not have to stick with the same option for every step. Sometimes one process makes more sense to have a single individual, and some processes make sense to have part or some have all. Like your final interview, it makes sense to have your full board or everybody who's available participate in that. Around the second interview process is usually when I would say more than one individual being present, and early on, delegating a single individual is my recommendation there, because that gives you an opportunity to have everybody involved throughout the process. Everybody gets to meet with them, but then people are not dedicating an extreme amount of time through the entire process and getting bogged down with their daily work along with this recruitment process. So yes, thank you for that question.
I have a follow-up comment question, to board member Patel's question, just to make sure I'm understanding. I don't think we need another option, because if we chose to have an option B, for example, where both, multiple people are involved, couldn't we as the board decide that that could be the whole board? Like, we don't have to have a third option that says the whole board, because our subcommittee could be the whole board, because we decide who the subcommittee is, right? So that your option is included in that option.
Board member Patel, that exactly he clarified,
Okay.
so I'm agreeing with you.
Okay,
Yes, and again, I only mentioned that earlier because some board members have already expressed that they don't want to participate in the process. So rather than listing the full board, it would just be subcommittee, and it may be the full board or close to.
Board member Beneddle, and is this strictly for board members to be able to participate, or are board staff able to select or delegate a couple of staff members that would be willing to go through this process and kind of rank on their behalf of the staff to participate in it so that it kind of gives them an idea as well?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, that is possible. Again, I usually recommend that just the board chair, board president, or board members being involved in that bid recruiter process, unless you're going to establish a subcommittee of other members and then do both the first and second interview. Usually it's the second interview that we have members of staff, potentially additional agency heads from outside of your agency, that are in similar sized agencies that can then provide feedback as well. But it is not limited to just your board to be able to do any of these subcommittees. You all can establish specific individuals. But as it was mentioned earlier, anybody who becomes a governing body would be subject to having to approve all of these things for it to be able to be in an executive session. And they would have to go through all of the same steps to be able to do executive session and open session to make recommendations to the board to move candidates forward.
So in this is board member Chin, previous recruiting, we've had staff and other agencies and association as part of the interview process. But I think it's in the second round of interviews that happened. But it is not just us.
Remember, Beneddle, I meant in the bid recruiter part of it, because by interviews, the selected committee has already gone through and separated, right? You've already made it to the point where you're in interviews. So if there was 20 original candidates, by the time staff is involved, half of those candidates have already been removed without them even knowing that they had that option, right?
It is completely possible to have that subcommittee of staff members, board members, et cetera, do the bid recruiter step of the phase as well, if you would like to choose that as an option.
This is board member Chin. I see the value of staff, but not interested parties and agencies and associations at that point. Personally, I think that because they're the most affected by, as you're noting, by our choices. We are, because we're going to direct that person, but the staff are the ones that, as you know, do the day-to-day living with that. So it does make sense to me about how staff is selected to do that and follow the same rules about if you do this, you have, do everybody. So, but yes, I like that idea.
That makes sense in a number of ways, especially as, staff are looking for you all to make final decision, but not necessarily the sole decision. So it does give them an opportunity to participate in multiple ways. Because after the interview processes, which first and second round, you can structure either one of them however you want. You have essentially the same options when it comes to composition around that. It's really a choice of, do you want to utilize VidCruiter for either of them? Do you want them to be virtual? Do you want them to be in person? Do you want a single individual? Do you want a couple people or a subcommittee, or do you want your full board? So those are your options, and you choose which structure you want for each round of interviews. And then we would move to the meet and greet section of the whole process. And this is where staff and interested parties get to be involved as well. As I mentioned earlier, when we were going through the recruitment plan, we would hold a meet and greet with each of the final candidates. Typically, we narrow that down to 3 by that point and give about an hour of time. Staff, interested parties would present their questions ahead of time, and I would remove any redundancies from the questions because we get multiple or grammatical issues potentially, and then ask those questions that were submitted by each of those groups to the final candidates, and give them an opportunity to answer all of those questions live in front of the staff and interested parties. And it gives them an opportunity to introduce themselves to the staff, give a brief background that staff who maybe didn't get to participate in that first round of interviews, but their colleague did, kind of a thing, to understand who we're actually looking at. And then all of that feedback comes to the full board for the final interview. Not much more in regard to the staff and Gov's office and interested parties piece that we haven't already covered. If you have any questions about how that all operates, I'm happy to expand. Okay, so after all of that takes place, then we would move into the reference checking phase, which would essentially be happening concurrently with the meet and greets, because we already know who our final candidates are that are going to go through the meet and greets as well as this final interview. And I would compile all of that along with all of the feedback that's received from staff, that's received from interested parties, that's received from the Gov's office. And we would typically do an in-person interview with the full board, potentially in this room, unless you all have relocated by that time. And at the end of the interviews, you would all get to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of your candidates, and I would present all of the information that's been compiled, both a verbal summary of everything that's happened, but I would send spreadsheets and Word docs that include all of the exact received information from each group. So you'll see word for word what your staff indicated, what your interested parties indicated, what the Gov's office indicated, and be able to take that into consideration and let all of those parties know their voices are heard before you make a final decision. And you get to move into open session and approve a candidate for hire and do all the fun stuff when it comes to pay equity, which DAS supports you all with, and delegate authority to your new potential ED. That's the gist of the potential options that we have. Do we have any questions about those options before we look at any of the other documents that we have today?
One of the documents, the whole scoring thing that we do when if we choose to, however many people are, when we read all this stuff and then there are scoring to do that.
I did not send that document, but I can send that over to Rachel and she can pull that up.
It's an extensive document.
Yeah.
And so how we score is an extensive process and a lot of time in scoring each of these people. But that's where the that preference also, that's where you see the vet preferences. You get 10 points automatically if you're a vet. So just trying to, I know that we've talked about veteran preferences and where that comes into play, but that's where you see it first.
Thank you. And also, it's a great thing that you brought this up. We have two different ways that we can go about the actual scoring of applications and interviews throughout the entire process. So I'm sending two different documents to Rachel right now, so we can pull those up. So give me just 1 second here.
Sherry has a hand up too. Carrie, go ahead.
Thank you. There was a comment earlier that it's small, but I just wanted to mention, because this is a decision point for the board. The state typically gives out the questions for each round of the interview process 15 minutes before the interview. So the candidates do have a little bit of time. Someone did mention about whether or not candidates answer on the fly or have advanced time. That is a potential decision-making point as well through various parts of this process. Is, do you want them to have advanced viewing of interview questions? So just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Jill, did you receive the documents? I just sent them over.
I did. Give me just a moment. I have to put it on a flash drive because I don't have Outlook open on here. In chat. Thanks. Give me just a second.
So while she's pulling those up, I'll explain what I meant by two different ways of scoring. So veterans preference was brought up earlier, and this is a good time to discuss that. Veterans are guaranteed certain rights throughout the recruitment process. If a veteran applies to your position, they meet the minimum qualifications, all of the requested attributes, and any other special attributes that you might list on your announcement, they're guaranteed a first interview. If they don't meet all of them, they're not guaranteed a first interview, but they are guaranteed preferential points. And so the preferential points come from their veteran status. So dependent on their service, they may receive 5 or 10 percentage points, preference points. And so that all comes through me. I would be the one who determines how many points they get and how that gets tacked on and everything. But usually if we have a large number of veterans in a pool, it makes more sense to do a numeric scoring because you can give the preference to the veterans most appropriately. You're not having any sort of discrepancy in your scoring. You can see exactly what their total is out of 100 because we have to convert everything out of 100 per veteran preference law, which makes it real fun. And then they get 5 or 10 points added to that. However, if you have no veterans in your pool, or maybe just one, we do have a forced sorting method where essentially you group them into piles, as we refer to them, where you would have not desirable up to highly desirable. And we typically do that on a 5-pile setup. And you would then go through and just indicate this person's highly desirable, this person's moderately desirable, et cetera, throughout each of the candidates. And then at the end, you say, I want to move all my highly desirable people forward. If you have a veteran who was ranked moderately desirable and they're a 5-point vet, they get pushed up 1 pile. So between moderate and highly, there might be potentially desirable that they would move up to. So they're not guaranteed an interview at that point. But if they're a 10-point veteran, between moderate and highly, there's 2 piles. They would move up 2 piles. They're now in your highly desirable pile and they're guaranteed an interview. So 2 ways to go about it. Numeric scoring takes longer up front, but it's much clearer where a candidate sits in the rank order. The pile sort is a lot easier to group candidates, but there's a lot more gray area in preference.
This is Board Member Chin. Didn't we do numbers the
Yes,
first time?
yes.
So I remember because I see so many different rankings and on different things that they do, but that, I remember doing the numbers and having to score. We had to actually do our scores.
Yes.
Which one would you
When
like
you
first?
open the pre-scoring, yeah, that's the actual numeric value document.
Let me share this with our callers. Well, let's make sure it opens.
I think it just helps to have that visual of what we're looking
Absolutely.
at. So it's an Excel document. It's big, it's independent on how many.
Sorry to do this to you, Rachel.
That's okay. Give me just a sec, because we never open spreadsheets in here. See if I can,
Okay, so this document is large and daunting when you first look at it. Up at the top, you can.
yeah, give me just a second. There you go.
At the top of the document, you can see the rating scale. We usually do a 0 to 4-point rating scale where it shows doesn't meet up to exceeds. And just below that, you can see on the left-hand column, it says requested skills and attributes. So whatever we determine we're going to have on that job announcement later, those desired attributes would land right there. And then the next two columns, it says weight factor and max points. So our max points is determined by that scale if we choose to do 0 to 4. But then we can also say, well, you know what, the desired attribute number 3 is more important than 1, 2, 4, 5, etc. We want to double the weight factor of that one. So you would switch it to a 2, which automatically makes your max points possible turn to 8. And then you can go through in each of these other columns that are listed as applicant name and just put your scores out of your general 1 to 4, and it auto corrects the total weight factor of each of your points. So you get to think just in 1 to 4 throughout the whole thing, and it doubles or triples or whatever it might be for you. And if you'll scroll down to the bottom of it here, there's a conversion for veterans preference that's listed there as well. This works well when we have a single individual doing the scoring. If we have multiple of you, I don't look at that at all. I take your total weighted scores and aggregate them, convert those weighted scores to be out of 100, and then add the preference. So there would be an additional document that would be made after that. But you would go through this for every candidate, look at each desired attribute and say, do they have 1 point, 2 points, etc. With a veteran in this situation, if they have a 0 on any of those fields, they're not guaranteed a first interview. If they have 1 point or more in every one of those fields, they're guaranteed a first interview.
And if I recall correctly, and it might have been just because of the technology I was using, I couldn't see all of it all at one time, so I had to add, I think, all the questions down to do the form. It was a real struggle.
It's not always the most user-friendly document, but it is robust and shows correct information. We are working on trying to make a clearer, more user-friendly version of this, hopefully in the near future. But that's what the numeric scoring looks like. Rachel, if you don't mind opening the other one that says candidate disposition style sort, this is kind of a combination of things. So it's not exactly what you would see, but I just wanted to show the rank key that's up there in row 4. That's the 5-pile situation.
Just a second, so the public can see it.
Can I ask you a question, Caroline, meanwhile she's opening? So who decide the weighted factor or weighted score?
You all would decide that today, determining which desired attributes we're going to list, and then if you would like to weight any of them.
Okay, I don't think so last time we decided,
There's
so.
no weight added last time around. Everything was left as a 1-to-1 ratio. Yeah. With the pile sort that I was talking about, there's the rank key. You go not desirable, possibly desirable, moderately, substantially, or highly, right? And then you list all of them. And like I was saying,
That's
if you're
great.
put,
It's too big, that's way too wishy-washy.
yeah, it works easier for lower level positions, I could say, where you're not looking for as many specifics in your candidates, or like in an earlier version of the process. But again, if a 5-point bet exists, they move up 1 pile. If a 10-point bet exists, they move up 2 piles. That's how that works out. But those are our 2 options. And again, just like every other step of this process, you're not restricted to using one throughout the entire process. You could choose that your application review is all the numeric scoring and that your first round of interviews is a pile sort situation. BidCruiter has its own rank key that's a 5-star situation that we don't really have the opportunity to change, but it's very easy to convert to actual numbers. And you could choose to do your 3rd interview as the pile sort. So you're not stuck with one the entire time. Okay. Unless there are any other questions around the scoring, I think our next document to look at is the advertising plan.
Yes, so this is gonna be mailing B for those of you on the phone. Just a second, Kyla, and I'll share it in.
So to preface this document, this started with the advertising plan from the last round. There were a lot of good options that were presented ahead of time, some that we used, others that we ended up not using, etc. So I took that old advertising plan and adapted it this time around, and we can change that here. You can choose to post on some of these and not all of them, or you can go with all of them. It depends on what you'd like to see. But at the top here, we have agency email distribution lists, any sort of listserv that you all are on, you can share the announcements with as well. As much word of mouth as possible is going to benefit us in the long run. But those listservs are specifically ones that I have access to within DAS, where they can share to all of our other agency heads and they can distribute it out as well. And just below that, if you don't mind scrolling down just a little bit, Rachel. We have all these professional associations and publications. Last time around, we used OSPA and Pharmacy Week, as well as the National Pharmacy Technician Association, I believe. I can't remember if we actually used Pharmacy Technician Certification Board or not. But I have updated the prices. I went through and looked at what their total costs are. The American Society of Health Systems doesn't have anything listed. You actually have to reach out and try to purchase something before they'll give you a price. So that's fun. And then there are some that have no actual cost whatsoever. If you scroll down a little bit further here, we have a number of sites that we can share to that cost us nothing, or we already have accounts with, such as Partners in Diversity, Oregon Advocacy Commission, OHSU, a number of those things, and we can get them posted there. If you all have anything that you'd like to add to that, this would be a great time to say, hey, I don't see this on the list. Why not? Let's add it. Or if you have experience with any of these and you think that there's no like positive ROI, we can remove it from the list as well.
Board Member Kirkbride, it did strike me that American Pharmacists Association is not on there. ASHP is included, but not APHA. That seemed strange. I don't know if there's a reason, but I'd like to explore. I know we didn't, doesn't look like we used it last time. That's a national level for those who don't know, but I was just curious why there was one and not the other.
Apologies. Do you mind stating that one more time?
Sure. American Pharmacists Association, APHA.
I've made a note of that. So at this point,
I have one more.
oh, go ahead.
And I don't know if this would be included with the OSPA posting, but NASPA, the National Alliance of State Pharmacy Associations.
It's funny that you bring that one up. When I went to their website, it just linked back to OSPA. It didn't give me an option to do separated, but I can double check that for sure.
Kylan, or we decide on what the attributes are, do we have to decide now about where we want our advertising dollars to go?
You don't have to decide right this minute. We can continue to look at the rest of the documents and then come back and make a decision.
I think we should probably do that because I think, going over what the staff's, what we heard about staff, concerns are and where we're headed, I think that would feed back into some of the piles of monies in terms of where we want to spend dollars.
Absolutely. Then the next documents we have to look at are the position announcement and the position description. So I shared the position description with Rachel just a moment ago, and whatever is listed on that position description will impact the announcement. So I think it would actually make sense to look at the description prior to the announcement. It should also be noted that this may not be the most up-to-date version of the position description that you all have. I did not have access to one in Workday. This is what was shared prior to the 2023 recruitment. So we may want to additional edits here.
So I'm sorry, you said you want to edit in real time because I'm not logged into 365. So
You can always make a motion to approve with amendments so that it doesn't have to be
There you go.
listed in real time.
we can say as revised. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you just.
So one of the main things with the position description that was discussed heavily last time around, and I assume would be this time, is the actual requirement of whether or not a licensed pharmacist is necessary for this position. With the position description, you all would be more of the experts on what the scope of the position is and then what you're wanting to see on the position description. So we can give you all a moment to review that as well.
Staff member Melvin, staff member Efremov can take notes for us on this. You were not going to see me typing up this version that I'm projecting though, but she can. Maybe track changes. Okay,
You want to scroll down just a little bit so they can review as we're going through?
you bet. Probably to the next section. This is just our mission.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
very basic stuff here.
So let me know when you guys want me to keep going.
There another word besides subordinate?
Yeah.
Not a fan of that word.
Noticed that as well. I was wondering if that would be changed to direct reports or something like that.
Yeah, that's such a negative connotation of
To not be the relationship.
that's not the right word.
Jerry Lauer is still on control.
She had, oh, she is still here. She has another
I'm
meeting.
here.
She's-
Jerry, is there any issue with adjusting that language? Do you know why that might have been included originally?
Subordinate, it's
No,
always
this-
been on there.
This PD is really entirely what the board wants it to be. So this isn't our language. This was originally written by the board. So feel free to make adjustments as you feel appropriate.
So how do the managers want to be referred to in terms of the executive director? There's just gotta be a better word.
Someone mentioned direct reports.
We typically see through the leadership team versus saying direct reports or even managers, because oftentimes there's other people who may not be actual managers. So maybe through the leadership team.
Leadership team is what I keep hearing them referring to the leadership team on the board often. That has a much more positive connotation and relationship than subordinate. Does leadership team feel about that? You're not subordinate, baby.
We're not insubordinate. Shall we keep going? You ready to see the next paragraphs? Okay.
Thank you to the staff making notes. I appreciate it.
So this is a question, we talked about, this is board member Chen, directs the development of the agency strategic plan, where I thought that that was what the board directs the strategic plan in. Okay, not the strategic plan. Just making sure it gets done. Making sure who's on first on that.
Oh.
When we say actively participate in board members in formulating policy, that would almost, you sort of need to have some idea about pharmacy rules and statutes.
Board member Kroger, I don't read that as, participating in rule formulation. To me, formulating policy would be board policy, whether it's the policy statement we just posted or shared, or policy regarding how meetings are conducted, but not necessarily rule policy. It could be rule making policy, but not the rule policy. I don't think it's appropriate that the executive director, there's some participation of the ED in rulemaking or the development of the rules, but I don't see that statement being, add to that.
Checking.
Board member Pinetto, we no longer do annual licensing. Is that correct? We do biannual every 2 years?
Board member Kroger, I think, other types of
We can amend.
registrations is annual manufacturing different outlets, I believe.
Yes, but this is talking about pharmacists, so we should amend annual. She's correct. We could add registrants if you guys would like to see registrants in that.
board member Beeman, it looks like the next paragraph addresses registrants, but it does list annual there as well. 'Cause it looks at, renewals for all licensees and registrants says, yeah, that's.
Okay. Yeah, look at the date on the footer in this, 2006. Are you right here? Read. Are the names still right? Fine. It's the National Pregnancy Day, right? Right. Okay. Okay, we'll keep going. That's not right.